Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video and talk about this particular subject that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by that of Boxing Eagle, who, of course, is a channel that I like to review here and there. Because oftentimes I think Eagle can bring up decent points or decent analyzations within his videos, while of course, in my view, some of the times, maybe even a little bit more than some of the times, inserting some of his politics or some of his biases, depending on which fighter that he may be talking about. And some people may disagree, but it is what it is. Anyways, one of the fighters that, of course, Boxing Eagle and many of the LDBC and new media members, one of the fighters that, of course, they have really beloved for the past several years is that of Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder. And of course, for those of you that go this far back, when I first started watching heavyweight boxing, I believe that it was known as the Vladimir Klitschko era. Now, of course, by the time that I started watching New Generation Boxing, Vladimir Klitschko, he still was the king of the heavyweight division, but it was very clear that he had started slipping a little bit. I believe that I had seen his fights against Kubrat Pulev and I think Alexander Povetkin. At least I had seen the highlights on that. I believe that it happened either a year or two prior. I can't necessarily remember before that of the Kubrat Pulev fight. I seen his fight against that of Brian Jennings. And then, of course, the last fight that he pretty much was known for before he ended up losing the titles was that of the Mega Tyson Fury fight. And a lot of people, of course, that don't really, remember that fight or remember what the media and the press was saying about that fight. A lot of people were expecting Tyson Fury to get knocked out within 5 or 6 rounds within that fight. They thought that that fight was going to be a very short encounter. But of course, Tyson Fury ended up surprising the world like he had throughout a multitude of times throughout his career. And not only did he beat Vladimir Klitschko, but in my view, he clearly beat him. I'm not going to go as far to say that he embarrassed him or that he clearly dominated him because, neither fighter really threw that many punches. But it was almost kind of like a better version of the Tiafimo versus Vasily Lomachenko fight, or at least a more dominant performance, to where neither fighters threw as much as what they probably could have, but one fighter you could tell was a little bit bewildered on how to get past the size, and on top of that, also how to get past the game plan, and for Vladimir Klitschko's sake, on how to get past that of the skill set of that of a Tyson Fury. It was very clear that, in my view, that the reach, the height, and on top of that, the movement of Tyson Fury, that it was giving Vladimir Klitschko a lot of problems. And then, of course, Tyson Fury, after that, he ended up taking some time off. And then two heavyweight fighters, which are pretty much saving that of the heavyweight division and would kind of take it to the next level. On top of that, with a great amount of other talent, that of the Brit, AJ Anthony Joshua, and of course that of the American Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder. And I remember Deontay's first fight that I ended up watching, I believe against Bermane Stiverne. He ended up winning that fight by unanimous decision. It was always clear in my view that he was never truly going to be anyone that was going to be a sweet scientist. He was always going to be a little bit rugged. He was always going to be a little bit raw in terms of his skill set. But one thing Deontay Wilder did bring you is that he gave you a great amount of heart to watch in his fights. And on top of that, he gave you a great amount of entertainment. Deontay Wilder, in my view, and I've compared him to this many times, he pretty much is the George Foreman of this era. Now, in my view, George Foreman, even though a lot of the times he was a big brawler as well, George Foreman was probably more skilled all around than what a Deontay Wilder was, but their heart and their mind is pretty much in the same place. They're both Plan A fighters. They're both somewhat dimensional brawlers. They're both bully fighters. And if you are able to get past that facade, if you're able to get past that Plan A, they're going to be in very deep water, or it's going to be very hard for them to try and come back and win that fight. But of course, Deontay Wilder, he's now talked about recently about a possible fight against one of the recent heavyweight champions, Mr. Oleksandr Usyk, who in my view right now is the current number one pound for pound fighter, at least very debatably, just with his recent work and what he's been able to do and how dominant he's been able to be with his resume as well, especially after defeating that of Anthony Joshua. Right now, I would probably have him number one, but if you had either Canelo or Crawford or even a Fury, I could understand that. Any one of those fighters, even maybe an Errol Spence, I would understand it. But anyways, continuing onward, of course, Deontay Wilder has stated that he wants a fight with Oleksandr Usyk, but that he believes that Oleksandr Usyk is personally afraid to fight him. Boxing Ego, of course, is going to talk about it. Let's tune in.
Oh my God. Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He says he wants to fight Oleksandr Usyk, but Usyk is a little afraid. That's what I want to talk about in this video. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I am back with some more boxing. Now, Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder, he is definitely training. He looks in shape as always.
When you take a look at Deontay Wilder, and it's no offense, the man is a great athlete, but he has absolutely no coordination in his legs whatsoever. Absolutely none. That's why whenever he's boxed, his feet look so horrible. He has very bad foot placement. A lot of the times he's caught flat footed, and if you put him on the back foot, he's pretty much going to be helpless. That's why Tyson Fury was able to dominate him so easily on the back foot, because Deontay Wilder has very little boxing ability on that of the back foot, at least if you're able to do it in the correct way, able to pressure him in the correct way. Now, if you let him stand still long enough, and if you let him get a counter off, and if your head is straight down the center line like that of a Luis Ortiz or Robert Lenius, yeah, he can catch you on the back foot. But if you're smart and intelligent about it like the way Tyson Fury was, I just don't see what Deontay Wilder is really going to be able to do.
And
But of course, there isn't many fighters, especially in that of the heavyweight division, as talented and as skilled as a Tyson Fury.
he's working on some things with Malik Scott. They are updating the fans if you follow them. He did talk about a fight with Usyk. And this is not the first time that Wilder mentioned a fight with Usyk. He says, and I quote, I'm all for it, but he's a little afraid. He's not a little afraid, he's a lot of afraid. You know, I'm in the business. I know a lot of things. So this was coming from Deontay Wilder. He believes that, Usyk don't want it. He says, we'll see what happens. I'm going to keep Usyk to his word. We will be calling his team and whoever his handler is, and we're going to see what's up. And if he's a man of his word, what a hell of a fight it would be. Now,
That would be a great fight, but let me just state this personally. Do I believe that the fight is going to happen? Probably not. Not unless Usyk is really backed into a corner to fight that of Deontay Wilder, and Deontay really embarrasses him to the point to where Usyk, pretty much, I'm not going to say is forced to fight him, because I think that Usyk is the type of fighter that is willing to try and take any challenge on. But I think that Usyk and his team know that if there's any fighter that you probably don't want to fight in that of the heavyweight division, it's probably that of Deontay Wilder. And really, if you're Usyk's team, if you're Usyk's manager, you're one of the champions there. You're one of the only two champions there at the heavyweight division. You have three of the four main belts. It is still possible that a Tyson Fury fight is going to happen. Why logically would you want to fight a Deontay Wilder next when he's 6'7" with an 80-something inch reach, and he could potentially knock you out at any time? That's not a fight that many fighters are really going to take willingly. Now, certain people may say, well, wouldn't that be a duck on Usyk's part? And, one could say that if they wanted to, but I think for Mr. Oleksandr Usyk that right now his eyes are going to be on the prize, which is against Tyson Fury. And I think Usyk and his team more than likely realize that Deontay Wilder, that could potentially be a very big stumbling block. Because in my view, if Usyk does get into that fight, I may bet on Usyk, but one could easily also bet on Deontay Wilder. Obviously, Deontay Wilder, he is not the skilled fighter, nor is he the boxing intellect or the boxing talent of that of an Oleksandr Usyk. But Usyk, in my view, does not have the one-shot knockout power or the level of power that he may need to consistently push Deontay Wilder back. And some people may say, well, Tyson Fury didn't necessarily have one-shot knockout power, right? But Tyson Fury has enough. Tyson Fury still has very decent power, very underrated power in my view. He can hurt you very badly with one shot, especially because he's a guy that pretty much walks around at damn near 300 pounds, at around 280 pounds when he's in the ring there. Those punches are going to hurt. Oleksandr Usyk is not a guy that packs a huge wallop. Now, of course, he was able to hurt Anthony Joshua a multitude of times, but it's pretty much known that Anthony Joshua, that his chin is not really up to par. Now, not me saying that he has the weakest chin that I've ever seen, but, he certainly does not have the strongest chin that I've ever seen. So that Deontay Wilder fight, it would be potentially very dangerous for both fighters.
here's the thing. Deontay Wilder, he was down and he fought, it was Robert Helenius. And in the Helenius fight, it was said from Usyk that Usyk was going to be a guest in attendance for that particular fight. And then when the time came, Usyk was a no-show. So that kind of is a bad look for Usyk. And I know some are going to argue, oh, but Usyk, he beat Anthony Joshua and he got the belt, so how could he be afraid? Joshua is 6'6", Wilder is 6'7", completely different styles. Wilder also.
Well, I agree that they're completely different styles. I just don't know why you would mention the difference in height by 1 inch. But I understand what you mean. They do have different styles. And Anthony Joshua was more of a good style for Oleksandr Usyk to try to fight. Because Anthony Joshua, he's not a guy that's really a brawler. He can sometimes try to get in there with you, and he'll try to kind of duke it out with you if he needs to. He tried to do it with Usyk in the rematch, but you can make Anthony Joshua lose confidence more often because Anthony Joshua, once again, is a guy that can be hurt multiple times by a multitude of fighters because he does not have the biggest chin in the world, or he does not have the strongest of chins in that of the boxing scene. Once again, it's not a mere combat, but it certainly isn't great for that of a heavyweight chin. It just is what it is. And on top of that, he's a guy that's a bit too stiff, and he's going to try to outbox you. And Wilder at times will try to do that, but the one thing I give Wilder credit for is this: he knows where his bread is buttered. He's not all the time going to try to really outbox you, because sometimes certain people believe that that's the best thing to do, to try and outbox the boxer. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to know where your bread is buttered. You have to know what brought you to that dance. You have to bring, the one that brought you, or got you there, as they say. I don't really remember the saying, whatever it may be, but you know what I mean. At the end of the day, Deontay Wilder knows what his true assets are. He has a punch that can pretty much knock out any man on this planet. And on top of that, he's 6'7" with an 80-something inch reach. He is going to have pretty much every physical advantage in this fight if he does end up facing that of Oleksandr Usyk. So I agree, it would be a more potentially dangerous fight than that of the Anthony Joshua fight.
Has more power than anyone currently in the heavyweight division. So yeah, fights like Anthony Joshua, fights like Daniel Dubois, that's a fight that I believe is the mandatory. And there is some danger there, but that's the case for most heavyweight fights, especially if you're in there with the puncher. But I think Usyk, being the smaller guy who came from cruiserweight, he would much rather fight Joshua. Some people say he lacks heart and that grit and that.
I don't think Joshua ever lacked heart, but of course, ego being that of the Deontay Wilder fan, I don't think that he's going to mind pushing that narrative whatsoever, because we all know that boxing ego, even though I like some of his analyzations, that he does follow that pro-black cult wokey mentality of that of the LDBC and new media. And of course, Deontay Wilder attracts those guys like flies to shit because he pretty much is exactly that guy. He pretty much is the king of the woke people. He pretty much is the kings of the pro-black cult mentality. So it is what it is.
Dog, and that was kind of shown in the Andy Ruiz.
And that's not me saying that Anthony Joshua hasn't done certain liberalized shit as well, but of course, Deontay Wilder being from that of America, which is pretty much, the mainland for a lot of that shit, of course he's going to get more media attention.
Right, and then we've also seen Daniel Dubois fight against Joe Joyce, who just recently lost, and he got beat into submission and his eye went away. And he's not as experienced on the pro level as some of the other fighters. So yeah, I can understand why Usyk would want to take those types of fights more so than a Deontay Wilder fight. Wilder.
I would understand as well. Once again, if I'm Alexander Usyk and his team especially, why would you want to fight Deontay Wilder when he has no belt? Really the only advantage that you're going to get is that maybe your star power could rise. But I mean, once again, it's very, potentially going to happen that you could potentially get the Tyson Fury fight, even though negotiations fell apart. More than likely, there's going to be a decent amount of pressure on both fighters for that fight to happen eventually within the next couple of fights, few fights at the worst, in my view. Why would you want to fight Deontay Wilder when you can fight a multitude of other fighters? He has no belt, and on top of that, he's very dangerous. I just don't see that fight happening, at least not at the current moment in time. Not unless a lot of attention is really put on Usyk. Then I think he'd take it, because I don't think Usyk is a guy to turn down a challenge, really. I think that he believes in himself quite a bit, but I think that he knows that Deontay Wilder, that he's a great threat.
He he told you, like in his build-ups and his press fight, in his pre-fight commentary and whatnot. He says, "I got to be perfect for 1 or 2 seconds. They got to be perfect for 12 rounds," and that's true, especially if you're coming from cruiserweight, because we just seen Oakley lose, and he was a cruiserweight talking about fighting heavyweights in the future, like Joe Joyce and things like that. And it's just a different ball game moving up in any weight class. Weight class exists for a reason. That's why I wasn't a fan of Canelo talking about he wanted to fight Makbuk Air at cruiserweight, because we knew he wouldn't fight Usyk, a natural cruiserweight, or somebody like better at cruiserweight. He wanted to
Right, but Ego, what are you truly saying, overall about Canelo Alvarez if you want him to fight that of a Oleksandr Usyk? I've already said this before, and this is when the rumors about the Canelo Alvarez versus Olunga Makabu or Makabu fight was about to, possibly happen. Like I said, I never personally minded that fight. And the reason why is because the fact that Canelo Alvarez is a guy, now one of course could argue that I'd rather see him versus David Benavidez and Charlo. All that's cool. I understand that. But if you're really calling for Canelo Alvarez to fight someone like Alexander Usyk, once again, a lot of people don't understand or they fail to realize that Canelo Alvarez is a guy that when he started getting into his 20s and started growing up a little bit, of course, I believe he started professional boxing at age 13, but when his body started maturing a little bit, he started at 154 pounds. Like his first major title was at, I believe, super welterweight or at the junior middleweight division. When he beat that of Austin Trout, or, well, actually, I think he got a title before then, but that was really his first A grade win. And then you're talking about a guy, of course, that's 5'9" with about a 71-inch reach at most. And then and then he's moving up the weight classes, and it's clear he's not even a natural light heavyweight. He's really not even a natural super middleweight, in my personal view. And then he goes up to cruiserweight trying to get a title there to become a champion in his fifth weight class. And you're like, oh well, why don't you fight someone like Alexander Usyk, who's a natural and not only just a natural cruiserweight, but one of the top 5 pound for pound fighters in the world? What are you really saying about Canelo Alvarez? Like I said, a lot of these guys from that on the quote unquote new media and LDB scene, they love to say all this shit about Canelo Alvarez, especially about, oh, he's a hype job and he's overrated and all this other shit. But these are the same guys that love to keep these same standards and say that Canelo should fight Alexander Usyk. What are you saying? What you're saying is that Canelo Alvarez is someone who's 5'9" with a 71 to 72-inch arm reach, a guy that started off at 154, probably is around in between a natural middleweight and natural super middleweight at this point in time in his career, isn't even as big as certain opponents like that of a Caleb Plant or a Danny Jacobs, and you want him to get in the ring with a guy that's going to probably be around 225 pounds. What are you really saying about Canelo Alvarez? What you're saying is that you know how truly great that he actually is. And that's why I say that certain number one pound for pound fighters, they deal with what I like to call the Floyd Mayweather effect, or one could just simply call it, the best of the best effect, or the number one pound for pound effect, because that's the exact same effects that many people gave Floyd Mayweather. They were never happy with any of his wins. They always said, well, Floyd, if you really want to prove yourself, why don't you go up to Gennady Golovkin's weight class and fight him there without a weight drain? Why don't you fight Sergio Martinez? Even though Floyd Mayweather Jr., he rehydrates at like 150 even, if not even a little bit lower. And they were wanting him to fight a guy that would have rehydrated at about 170 to 175. So once again, that shows you that they knew how dominant and how great that Floyd actually was when they were pretty much asking him to go 2 to 3 weight classes out of his way. It's the same thing here.
fight
Because no one takes a look at Roy Jones Jr., for example, and says, well, you know what? We can't count Roy Jones Jr.'s heavyweight title because his heavyweight title came against John Ruiz. And I've had certain people, of course, say, well, John Ruiz was a legitimate heavyweight contender. He was a decent heavyweight contender, but no one ever took a look at John Ruiz and said, wow, best heavyweight in the world. Like, no one ever said that. It just is what it is. And if you're saying that, you're lying to yourself. At the end of the day, John Ruiz was a very decent contender. He was relatively talented, but he was never a guy that was ever going to be thought of as the best heavyweight in the world. Never, ever, ever. That's why I compared it similar to that, just probably a weaker version, Canelo versus Makabu. But no one ever takes a look at Roy Jones Jr. and says, you know what, Roy? Yeah, you won that heavyweight title off of John Ruiz, but why didn't you fight Lennox Lewis? Why didn't you fight the creme de la creme, a guy that would have been 20 pounds heavier than you? Why didn't you fight someone like that? Like, no one ever says that. It's just ridiculous.
most limited competition. Now, Usyk, he has a good resume. He's a great fighter, but I definitely want to see the Wilder fight. Unfortunately, I haven't really heard Wilder, or excuse me, Usyk, show much interest in it recently. He doesn't really even mention the fight, and of course Wilder will want it because he's no longer a champion, and he's gonna like his style and skill, especially against someone who's smaller than him. And it's funny because old media at one point they were saying that Usyk is this and that and so much more skill. All that skill stuff out the window.
Well, he is so much more skilled than Deontay Wilder, but the question would be, is that would Usyk be able to keep away from that right hand, and would he be able to pretty much keep Deontay Wilder, in place, or would he be able to keep him honest? I guess is the best word placement I was trying to find it. Would he be able to limit Deontay Wilder to the point to where Deontay Wilder would not be able to get off that right hand to the utmost of accuracy like that of a Tyson Fury was able to do? Because if not, there's a very decent chance that Deontay Wilder that he could beat Oleksandr Usyk just by knocking him out, even though he probably would lose, the majority of the rounds, or at least some of them.
So when you get hit by a guy like Deontay Wilder, all that skill, because then you might have to just have the skill to survive. Because if you get hit with the right shot, you're not even gonna have the skill to survive. You're gonna be knocked out completely by the Bronze Bomber. So it is what it is. We'll see. Hopefully Wilder gets a big fight. I know he wants a big fight. I know Wilder would take the fight because again, he's not a champion right now, and that's a chance for all the titles that Usyk has. And Usyk is a smaller person. So yeah, Wilder fought Big Fury, who's like 6'9" or whatever, and weighed 300 pounds. I know he will fight Usyk. I don't care how crafty people think he is. Let me know what you guys think. What's next for Wilder? Drop your thoughts in the comment section, and I'm out.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. But I also do have to agree with Eagle that, in my view, that would be a very dangerous fight. Probably for both gentlemen, but especially for that of Usyk. And I just don't see that fight particularly happening, just not at the current moment in time. I think that it would happen once again if Deontay maybe became a mandatory, or maybe once again if, something else happened. But I just don't see it happening. There's so many other fights that Usyk could potentially take within that heavyweight division. Fights that I'm not going to say would be just as big as a Deontay Wilder fight, but say, for example, if he ended up getting in a fight with Andrew Ruiz, that'd be a relatively decent fight. It would rise his star power, and that's a relatively decent fight for both gentlemen and a relatively winnable fight for that of Oleksandr Usyk. Actually, that'd be a great fight. I'd love to see that fight. I'd also love to see Usyk versus Wilder or Ruiz versus Wilder. Any one of those fights I'd love to see. And of course, I'd love to see AJ versus that of Wilder, but I don't think that Eddie Hearn is really going to allow that fight at the current moment in time, because I think that he's trying to rebuild that of Anthony Joshua's confidence. And apparently, from what I hear, there's a possibility that he may rematch Dillian White in that of a rematch. So we'll see. That would be very interesting. I'd love to see that fight too, a rematch, because White, of course, has improved as a fighter, and we don't really know where AJ is right now mentally. So we'll see. But anyways, that's really about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Going to be very interesting to see what ends up happening. I've heard that Usyk is going to face Daniel Dubois next. I don't think that Daniel Dubois is going to fare well. I think he's a very one-dimensional fighter with great athleticism, but that's about it. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.